welcome to Tracy Mommy Reads. I am back again with another video. Today, I am so excited to be talking about the new book from Tayari Jones called Ken. I think this just came out like last week or 2 weeks ago. It is fairly new. I just got mine last week, so it probably came out earlier in the month. But I got it from the Book of the Month Club. And I wasn't going to talk about this book today. I had another video scheduled, but I pushed it back. Not back, but forward to another future date because I wanted to jump in on the conversation about this one since I've seen a lot of people talking about it and posting that they're currently reading it. I did not realize, and I'm looking in, like the front of her book where it says also by Tayari Jones. And with the exception of, I guess she has a book called Leaving Atlanta. That's the only book I haven't read by her, but I have all of her books on my shelf. The first book I ever read by her was Silver Sparrow. I loved that book. I also really enjoyed The Untelling. And I know it's not, maybe a popular opinion, but I wasn't all that, excited by An American Marriage. I think maybe because at the time that I read it, there was so much, chatter on Instagram about it. And there were some spoilers and, I don't know, I dived into it with expectations up to the sky. And it fell a little flat for me, right? But this, oh my God, Ken, I enjoyed this one so very much. So the premise of the book, you have these two women, Vernice and Annie, and they are like born in 1941 or thereabouts, and they are both motherless daughters. And how that happened, because everybody has a mother if they were born, right? Well, Annie's mom abandoned her. She was a young mother. She was a teen mother. She was 16 years old, and they were in a small town called Honeysuckle, Louisiana. And she, she couldn't do it, so she left the baby with her mother. So Annie's grandmother raised her. And Vernice, who Annie called Niecy, so she went by Niecy most of the time, her mother died. Okay, so her mother died, and her aunt came back to town, her mother's sister, and she ended up raising her. So I think that even starting off with something like that, you have these two women, and who the author describes as motherless, right? But you have other women that stepped up to raise them, but there was always still this longing for the person you came from, the person you belong to. And no matter how much love or care or, providing someone else does, often you cannot replace a mother. And I think in these girls, with their situation, I think they were longing more for something they never had, because looking at other people in their town and seeing how other people had relationships with their moms, I think that a lot of it was romanticized, and maybe they felt certain things would have been better in their lives had they had their mothers. I think that they both were feeling kind of like they were maybe somewhat of a burden to the women who did step up to raise them. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Anyway, so the book starts off when, like you have Niecy's starting off the story and just kind of giving us the backstory of her and Annie, because they were basically what they call cradle friends, because in that small town, they did have like a midwife, because a lot of people, back then, delivered their babies at home. And so these women would come and deliver these babies, and they were both delivered by the same woman, Miss Ola May. And this town was really small, and everybody was really close. So they were born around the same time. So they kind of, they grew up together. They had known each other before they were even aware of each other, right? And the book goes through them being infants all the way to early 20s. I want to say maybe 22 is at the oldest, because I remember at one point in the book somebody said that they were 20, right? But it goes, up to their early 20s, and it just shows the different paths that they each took. Vernice ended up going on to college because her aunt had left that town, and she was out living her life, for good or bad. She was living her life the way she wanted. She didn't have any kids. She wasn't married. And a part of her was a bit bitter that when she came back, because she came back to bury her mother, and her sister died while she was there. When there were, I don't know. Let me see if the blurb says how her sister died. No, so I won't say how her sister died, but that's Vernice's mother. So, but anyway, when her aunt came back, her plan was just to, hey, because mom was sick, and that's why she came back. But her plan was really just to go see her mom before she died, and then bury her, and then skedaddle and go back to the big city and not stay in that small town. But like I said, her sister died while she was there, so she ended up burying both of them, and she was hoping that somebody in the town actually would take her niece, because she was like, I don't want kids and I don't want to stay here. But she ended up, doing that. And that in itself was a sacrifice, and it wasn't something that Nisi took for granted, but her aunt, she was a trip. She really just did not have like anything maternal about her. She was very, this is life, this is how things go, this is what people want from you. She, even when like she was, Nisi was like a child, not really even understanding what she was saying, she would still say, certain things. And then on the other side, Annie, her grandmother, she was a much older woman, and she was very holy. She like, it was about church. She was quoting the Bible, and everything was going to get you sent to hell if you didn't do this, if you didn't do that. So, yeah, they both, like I said, were longing for their mothers because they felt things would be a whole lot different. So, Vernice ended up graduating from high school, and her aunt had saved up some money, and she was sending her to Spelman. She was going to go to college because she was really smart, and her aunt just wanted a whole different life for her. She was like, you do not want to get stuck in this small town, because after Nisi graduated, her aunt left too. She was like, I'm not staying here. There's so much more of the world to see. And her aunt was still relatively young. She probably was in her 40s, or whatever, early 40s when Nisi graduated. But Annie, her mom didn't die. Okay, remember, she abandoned her, so she was still out there in the world somewhere. So that was Annie's, mission. I'm going to find my mom. I'm going to find my mom. And so she didn't graduate. She ended up leaving the town, headed to Memphis to try to, because that she heard that was the last place that her mom was living. So, her and a couple of other people from the small town, they ended up going on this road trip to Memphis, where they had some crazy stops along the way. And even though their paths, they went their separate ways, they still were keeping in touch through letters. They found out where the other was, and exchanged addresses through Annie's grandmother, and they found out where they were, and they would keep each other up to date on their life and what was going on with them. Nisi's adventures in college, and moving into an entirely different type of social circle. There were people there that were all Black people, because again, you got to consider the times we're talking about, in the 40s and 50s, moving into the 60s, right? But all of these people that went to college there, it was black women. The majority of them were from well-to-do black families, and they had totally different ways of viewing the world, and the way that she started to carry herself was different and apparent, and her goal, she wanted to get married and have kids and have a nice house and, essentially have a nice life. She wanted the family that she didn't have growing up. And Annie, she started to become a victim of her circumstances, kind of taking jobs and living in places that weren't the best, with her ragtag team of people that she had left, their hometown with. And she still was just searching. She was just so obsessed with searching for her mother that, she was working in this bar. Every woman that came in that kind of looked like her, that was dark skinned or that may have been the right age, she was looking for her mother in every woman. And it really, I think, made her miss out on life that was right in front of her, because she was looking for something else. She had this fantasy in her head, like she was going to see her mother and her mother was going to think she was so beautiful and smart, and they were just going to bond, and her mom was going to apologize, and they were going to live happily ever after. But, I feel like, someone who is like, 55, and I lost my mother back in 2012, right? But I had her all the way into my 40s, okay? I feel like no matter how old you are, there is still always this like wanting for your mother, especially if she's not around. Certain things happen, or if you have kids, or you get married, or this happens, that happens, and that's who you kind of want to have there to share that with, especially women. I don't know, if men long for their mothers same way that women do. But I do also feel that once you are an adult, like there are certain things you can't expect for your mother to be able to fix or heal or solve for you, because now you're on this journey into womanhood, and your existence is totally different from hers. And although you may look to her for counsel, look to her for loving or a hug or reassurance or whatever, you have to live your own life and not necessarily count on her to continue holding your hand and walking you through life. But I think in that sense that Annie had some arrested development, because she was very much still mentally this little girl looking for her mother, when realistically she was like 18, 19, 20 years old. But, as I said in the beginning, how Nisi's aunt stepped up and Annie's grandmother stepped up. There were other women like Miss Ola May who delivered them. She ended up getting, her and her friend ended up getting Nisi to college after something had happened on her way there, and she had to come back home. There was another character that was on the trip with Annie. Her name was Baby Doll. She was a little bit older than Annie, but not by much. There was a couple of women that Nisi encountered when she got to college. There was a very colorful character that Annie encountered, a woman on her road trip. And I think the author had all these different versions of women who in some way, both these girls were like taking motherly things from them, things that they felt that they had been missing growing up, and they got these things from these women, various things that they needed. But one of the things that I feel like a theme that was running through the story, especially during that time period, and specifically with these black women, because we're all the women in the book were black women. I feel like there's this sameness that permeates the lives of Black women, no matter where you live in this country, in the United States. There's this relatability that we all share, being raised in a patriarchal society, number one, and then being a Black woman on top of that. No matter what your station in life, you can be, a rich housewife with, the fanciest cars and clothes, or a rich businesswoman, with your own thing. Or you could be a poor woman, living in a housing project. I think that often the world still sees you the same, from especially from the aspect of the skin that you're in. I think with Black women, like, we have to, oh my God, it's almost like you're never good enough. And I'm not just talking about from a racist standpoint. I'm not just talking about Black women, how other races view us. Sometimes how Black men view us, and you just flip on any podcast and you'll see what I mean. But I feel like the way that she was able to tell a story where those themes jumped out of this book, that's the thing. And you can see I took all these notes that I, took away from that. And the word kin, I feel like it really related to the relationship between Annie and Niecy, even though they weren't biological siblings. They were probably closer in some regards. And there was something like towards the end where they were talking about next of kin or whatever. But I feel like this word kin refers to what I was just speaking of, is when you have a shared or similar experience that makes you able to relate to someone that you may not even know. I think the word kin is relative, no pun intended. Yeah, I mean, I could just wax poetic about this book. I love when authors tell stories that are not only entertaining, and that keep you turning the page and you're engrossed, and maybe you're rooting for characters, and you're wondering what's going to happen, but also there is like aha moments and commentary that you can take from it that's deeper than what the words that are on the page. However, the author isn't beating you over your head with all this stuff like, oh, poor me, because all these women were working hard and they were trying to move past their situations, and they were determined, and they weren't letting anything or anyone hold them down. No matter what happened, they got back up and tried again. So it wasn't like the author was necessarily beating you over the head with it, but you still got it. You know what I mean? I feel like you still got the message that was ultimately being told in this story. And I love when words become more than words, like they have deeper meanings. Okay. And it's been a while since I've read a book like this. I'm trying to think the last book. I can't even think right now, but I've read books like that where, it's deeper than what's on the page, and you have to kind of sit with it, when everything's said and done, to get maybe the lessons or the real story that the author was trying to tell. And I'm not going to give any spoilers, but I will tell you that I was wrecked at the end, because what the hell? What the actual hell? Okay. I will say this. Each girl ultimately found what they were looking for. Whether things ended the way they wanted or it should have happened, you have to read to determine that. But I think ultimately they found what they were looking for. And I would have loved an epilogue. Maybe a future, jump into the future, like, to see how things played out, especially with one of the characters. you know. But yeah, it was really, really good. I really enjoyed this one. If you like books that have some historical, references, um, that deal with women's issues, that deal with deep friendships, that deal with coming of age, that deal with family dynamics that are kind of messy. Um, and then ultimately, like the characters, like you see the character arcs, the growth, and how the characters ultimately find themselves. My goodness, don't walk, run, and pick up cans. I think you would really, really enjoy it. Um, you know, I normally give trigger warnings. I'd started doing that, but I don't know that I can give trigger warnings without without giving this book away. So I don't know if the author maybe has some on her page, but yeah, just when you think women's issues, just whatever falls under that umbrella, it's probably talked about or dealt with in this book. So just be mindful of that in any sense. So yeah, I could go on and on, but I'm gonna stop. If you have read Ken, I would love to know your thoughts in the comments. Am I doing too much, or do you get what I'm saying? Do you get what I'm trying? Are you picking up what I'm throwing down? Okay. Did you feel the same about it, or what are your thoughts? Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching. Make sure that you like this video and go ahead and take the opportunity to subscribe to my channel if you have not done so already. To everyone who is already subscribed, thank you, thank you, thank you. I sincerely appreciate it. You guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I will see you next week. Bye.